the continuation of the TRC thematic and institutional hearings. This morning, to officially begin, shall we all stand to observe a few moments of silent prayers? Please stand. Thank you very much. Please remain standing as we administer the oath. Raise your right hand up. Put the right hand up.
I, the Reverend Roberta A. Phillips, do solemnly swear that my statements I have come to make to the TRC of Liberia is the truth, nothing but the whole truth, so help me God.
Good morning, Madam Witness.
Good morning. How are you?
The Commission wants to invite you to this session and thank you very kindly for deciding to come and share with this Commission your experience as well as matters that affect the work of the Commission. The TRC has a mandate to investigate and document human rights abuses of all sorts from 1979 to 2003. But notwithstanding, the mandate requires that if there is any individual who has a case of human rights violation predating 1979,
Sorry, I cut it off.
please move the bottles of water. If there's any case of rights violation predating 1979, the Commission is under obligation to do as much investigation as possible. Also, part of the mandate of the Commission is to clarify historical events so that fallacies, misconceptions of the past can be corrected at a time when the nation is grappling with its challenges and intend to right the wrongs of the past and correct history. It is from that background and with our understanding of your ancestry linked to the late David Coleman, you have been invited to come to the Commission and share your experiences. Before you commence, Madam, I will introduce commissioners who are here present. Commissioner Sheikh Kafuma Kone is at the right flank of the panel. Next to him is Commissioner Per Brambu, Commissioner Dede Dolope at my immediate right. At my immediate left is Commissioner Massa Washington, and then Commissioner Joe Stewart. We say welcome, thanks for coming. You may proceed with your testimony.
Well, good morning, everybody. For a long time now, I've been contemplating whether I should come to this commission or not. And my fears were, first of all,
May I interrupt you, please? I forgot. Can you say a little bit of yourself first before you go into the presentation?
Okay.
Yeah.
My name is the Reverend Roberta A. Phillips. I am a priest in the Episcopal Church of Liberia. Until we close, I'm the acting principal of B.W. Harris And at the moment, I'm the administrative assistant to the diocesan bishop, the Right Reverend Dr. Bishop Jonathan B.B. Hart. And my story will be on those who were close to me, my mother, the late Mrs. Georgia B. Coleman, my daughter, Andrita Phillips, my first cousin, Leon Coleman, my uncle, Henry Coleman, 3 other children, Margot, that lived with my mother, and most of all, my brother, the late Robert Phillips. Like I said, I had some doubts for coming to this commission in the first place because I was not certain what would happen with the statements. Because if you say reconciliation, for me, reconciliation means that you must tell me you're wrong that you've done to me. In order to be reconciled, you must be penitent for it. You must feel some means of responsibility for it. And also, there should be some penalty for it. So those were the things that held me back. But then, in less than almost a year, something has happened and is happening, and my thought was, do I want to go into another Robert Phillips issue? In other words, which I will come to later on, all that happened to my brother Robert was done by this, when I say this government, I don't mean this Ellen Johnson Sirleaf government. I mean the government of the Republic of Liberia. Every incident in my life has been caused by the Liberian government and those who were in power. I will not talk on 1955 because my uncle Othello Coleman has already said something about it. But what I want to state here is that that was one of the first issues that started my whole dramatic portion of my life. And I remember my mother, Georgia Coleman. I remember my grandfather died. You know, he was a Mason. And I remember that none of them showed up. I remember also that my uncle Joe Riches, and I forgot who else it was, had to bathe those dead bodies. I remember not even the priest. I don't remember a priest being there, but I remember a lay reader, David Riches, who had to do the service. And I remember it was at a time where my Uncle John's birthday was the 18th of June, and this incident happened right after. And my brother's birthday was the 22nd of June. And I remember from that day, my brother never celebrated his birthday up to his death because of the memory. And I remember that night, my mother standing at the window holding us. And I remember also when we left the funeral, when she came home, for about 9 days, my mother never said a word to us. I'm all right. My mother never said a word to us. She sat in that chair for 9 days until Louise Samuels finally came to her and said to her, Georgia, you got to do something, you got children. And that's what made her get up. Like I say, my biggest fear, my biggest worry has always been for those from this government, the government of Liberia. And then after everything quieted down a little bit, we started school. And every time we went to school, the other parents were telling the children, don't play with those Coleman children. Don't forget those Coleman children. And then my mother decided that she was not going to put us through that, and we left the country. And it's amazing that 25 years after that, we come back, and what happens? You know, for some reason, before April 12 happened, I was out of the country. And my cousin, Sophie Dunbar Brewer, was coming over because she has some medicals to do. And she asked me to wait for her instead of coming, you know. But I just had this funny feeling. And I told her, I said, Sophie, I got a funny feeling something is going to happen. And I don't want to be away from, you know, from my children and my mother. I came home, and about 2 weeks after that, April 12 happened. Of course, by June, we left here. But by September, I came back. But also came back, and then 1980, I think he was the administrative assistant to Pino, Harrison Pino. He moved into my aunt's house, and we went to ask him to get out of it. And he took us to Pino. And Pino said, you bring your tax papers and bring everything to show the property is for your aunt and whatnot. And that day we went, we carried the tax papers, everything else. And he said, okay, look, they will take you down to finance so you can verify it. And while we were going, I said to my mother, they said, no, leave your car. You know, we're driving the car in a small car. And I remember telling my mother, I said, Mama, I got a funny feeling we're going to jail. She said, Roberta, don't tell me that. I said, I think we're going to jail, Mama. By the time we passed Anthony Stadium, we turned left. I said, I told you we're going to jail. Pino had sent us to jail. We got to jail, and the commander at the time asked the man, what do you bring these people here for? He said, Pino said, we'll bring them. He said, search the people. He said, I'm not searching this old lady. So he told us, he said, look, if there's somebody you want to send a note to let them know where you are, I said, yes, and I gave a note. I said, and I have to move my car from the Capitol building. And then he told her, he said, give your pocketbooks to these ladies here. Anyway, he made provisions for us. Later on, my younger brother, Lamb, came and, you know, to find out what had happened and things like that. Anyway, we spent the night in jail. The next morning, my cousin, who's just like a brother, Aaron Milton, my brother Robert Phillips, and my father went to the prison. And Pino told them, we must sign the paper over to him or else we're not coming out. My mother refused to sign unless I signed. I refused to sign. But my cousin made me sign the papers and say, sign it. That very night, that was the 17th, I think it was the 17th of December, we came out on the 18th. When we went home, as we sat there, you know, people came to say, you know, what happened and whatnot. We heard that Winston Richards and Walter Richards had been jailed that very night by Pino. And really beaten. Anyway, that passed. I remember in between, I don't remember the year, but I remember one year, the government of Liberia kidnapped my brother. My sister-in-law called me that night and said, Sister Roberta, it's not like Robert will stay out of the house this time of night. Something must be wrong. I called a friend of mine, the late Lafayette K. Morgan, and I told him, I said, something is happening. We went from police station to police station. We crossed the bridge to that place in St. Paul where Charles Tillers lived before, and all over. Then by 4 o'clock that morning, I went to my father. When I got there, he was brushing his teeth. So I said, oh, you heard about Robert? He said, what about Robert? He said, I'm getting ready to go to work. Then I told him what had happened. I said, we can't find Robert. He said, what do you mean you can't find? I said, Dada, Irina called me. I've been to the police station. I cannot find Robert. Not knowing that was the start of everything else. The next morning, my younger brother Lamb, he was in the army. He was a pilot in the army. He went all over looking for Robert. He found Robert in one place in BTC. By the time we could get there, they had moved Robert to another place. And that's how they were moving, and that's how we were searching. And where it started from? Robert was a civil engineer. He was doing some work, I think it was either in Sino or one of those counties. And the company that he was working for had these pipes that, they didn't want. Robert bought the pipes, sent it up to me in Monrovia here, and we found buyers for it. We found out that Water and Sewer could use them, so we decided to sell it to Water and Sewer. Little did we know that was the worst thing we could have done, because again, that's what had caused all of this problem here. And then Robert was caught again, put in jail, and at one point, they wanted to jail me. My father and I was supposed to have been traveling that year. I was going to go pick up my children, because they were with my mother, and come back. And so I knew they were behind me. So I told my father, I said, you go, I will stay. And luckily I did, because they were at the airport asking where was I. Anyway, my father left. And it took several signatures for them to let me go and pick up my children. They gave me 2 weeks. And the 2 weeks, by the time I got back, they had been to Robert's house that morning to find out where was I. Robert said, I'm going to the airport. We came from the airport, we went straight to his house, dropped my children, and when we dropped the children, they took us to OCID office near Greystone, in that area. And we stayed there the entire day. And I said to them, I said to Robert, Robert, I got a funny feeling they come jail us. He said, what made you think that way? I said, because something is wrong somewhere. And sure enough, that's what they had planned to do. So I told them, I said, look, I dropped my children. I don't know what they've eaten or anything else. I need to go find out. So they said, okay, you can go. I said, but my brother said, no, you can go. So immediately I went to my uncle, Anson Coleman, and I told him what had happened. And then Anson came, Mac McCready, the whole group of them went down there, and we managed to get Robert out. But the thing about it is, every single thing went the wrong way. Because at that point, when they finally released Robert that day, after they had kidnapped him, they went and they called, what the name? Green. Herman Green. No, and the vice president's son, Minnie Green's son, Herman Green. They called all of us down to the place opposite. Civil service has a building there. They had some kind of office in that building. And we went there, and then when Pino sent for me to arrest me, Mrs. Sarah Bashu said to me, she said, he has a girlfriend upstairs. Let me go and find out what's happening. Then she told me to go. I went. We went where Estrada Bunai used to live long time ago by Bidel Funeral Home in that area. That's where Pino was. When I got there, they told me sit down. He never looked at my face. He had his head back. Sarah Bashu came later on. He said, oh, Ma, what happened? And she said, but you finished locking my son up. Now you want to lock my daughter up. He said, me? He said, yeah. I said, well, he said, yeah, my daughter there. When he brought his head down, I think it was at that point that he recognized me, So he said to her, okay, care her. Tomorrow you bring her to the office. So the next morning I went there, and we sat down there. He used to drive a little white Honda. He came, he saw us sitting down, he took off and he left. Went inside. When we went inside, they said, okay, they will release Robert. Herman was sitting down there, Minnie Green was sitting outside. Somebody came outside and pinched and said, I think they come arrest your son. So she didn't say anything. She went inside, she sat down. When she sat down, the man said in crowd, go grab the other one quick and lock him up. So when the man went to pass, she stopped him. She said, wait. And she said in Sapo, she said that my son, you calling to go arrest? And the man was shocked, that she could speak it. Anyway, after that, they let Herman go. But then, I remember 1985 elections. I remember when they started to tally the ballots. I don't know what their motives were, but I remember Emmett Harmer walking. They had a thing, I think it was 17 feet from the ballot counting that everybody had to sit. So all of the parties were sitting that distance. He went to Robert, took Robert's book, his tally book. The next thing we knew, Emmett Harmer was on TV saying that he had caught Robert Phillips cheating. And even the people who were at the table couldn't understand how was it that Robert Phillips sitting at the table was cheating when there were 17 or more feet from the count of the ballot. And I remember that night, my father called us, we came to his house, and he said, I will ask Emmett Harmer why he lied on my son. Anyway, we left, went home. Right after that, they came on the newspaper. My father went to his office, which is Presbyterian Church down here, that day. And the newspaper said my younger brother Lamb had been dropping ballot boxes, ballots also that, were so Doe couldn't win. When my father read the paper, he was so upset. He went down to Public Works, because he used to work at Public Works. He was trying to explain the story. He was so upset that he had a heart attack. And I don't remember, but I was talking to Lamb last night, and he was telling me that Mr. Rinsbury was there. And he said to Rinsbury, take me to the hospital. But that was what my brother had said. But by the time they got to the hospital, he was dead. I remember that morning I had not left my house. And then Richard Butler came to my house and he said, oh, Robbie, he said, I was listening to the radio just now and I heard that they took your pa to the hospital. I said, really? He said, I don't know what happened, but I just heard it. But of course, he wasn't telling me everything. So I jumped in my car, and apparently I found out later on, he had parked and was waiting behind me to drive behind me. So by the time we got to Cali Junction, I saw my brother coming with my sister, and I said to her, and she was crying. And I said to him, and all he could do was, so I blamed the death of my father on Emmett Harmer. Because if he had not lied on my brother, Robert would be alive today. That would be one of the problems. And another thing is, the reason why I blame him, because also that started the whole process behind Robert being followed. All right. Robert being followed, Robert being everywhere he went, somebody was behind him. Anyway, we buried my father died on the 22nd, it was a Tuesday. We buried him that Sunday. And I remember very well the incident where I had this dream. And I sent to my brother's house to tell him I wanted to talk to him. Anyway, he came over that night. And I told him the dream. I said, you got to be careful. And he said, Roberta, he said, don't you think I know I'm being followed every day? I said, well, anyway, I'm telling you the dream. And then my mother said to him, I will never forget, she said, Robert, I don't want another 1955 to happen in my life. And I said, oh, all right. And then he said, Mom, what do you expect me to do? He said, what do you expect me to do? He said, every day I'm being followed. I know it. He said, but what do you expect me to do? Luckily for him, his children were not here. Luckily. Anyway, it ended up, right after that, November 12th happened. When November 12th happened, Robert was picked up But before he was picked up, he managed to get out of his house. Went to the back and he went to a friend's house. I will not call the friend's name. And then the friend came and told me, said, I have your brother at my house. But my father is saying that he doesn't want him there. So I came to find out how best we can solve this problem. And I said, okay, let's go. So I told him, I said, Robert, come to my house. He said, Roberta, he said, you got your daughters. He said, the first place they would look for me will be your house or my house. And then he had another friend, a foreign friend. And he said, bring him to my house. So I drove the car. He was in the back. I carried him there. But then it was a little bit too far, and it was a whole lot of other things, and I said, we got to go get him. So we brought him, and we carried him to my aunt's house, Diana Coleman's house, right on 15th Street, between Coleman and Chisholm Avenue. That's where we carried him. And eventually I told Mama, I said, Mama, we got to turn Robert up, because I don't want Robert to be, killed somewhere on the street, brutalized somewhere in the state, and we never find his body. So I went to him, I said, Robert, we're going to turn you in. He didn't want it to happen, but I said, we have to turn you in. And Father J. Jellicoe Bright, my mother's priest, he came, Edward Massacre came, we called him, and we told him to carry Robert. I went to go carry food and whatnot. The next thing I knew, I'm coming down Capitol Bypass, and all of a sudden I saw my brother chained to the back of a pickup in his underclothes. Chained to the back of a pickup in his underclothes. And I turned around, and it was my sister and Madeline. I turned around and they went on the old road. When they got on the old road, they carried them inside. And I asked the boy, I said, at least let me give him the slippers to put on. They gave the slippers. They kept him there for a while, everything else. Then they ended up eventually taking him to Post Stockade. They took Robert to Post Stockade and they handcuffed him to somebody he never knew. Robert was handcuffed November, December, January, February. Every time I went to go find out about the handcuffs, they said, oh, they would take it off. Then he would send me notes and say, the handcuffs are still on. And I remember right here on, I think that's Benson Street, they had some security office somewhere in that area there. And I remember it was Massacre, the whole group of them, and they kept saying, don't forget, this is David Coleman's grandchild. I will never forget that statement. Don't ever forget that this is David Coleman's grandchild. Robert stayed handcuffed. When he wanted to go to the bathroom, boss said he's not moving, he didn't move. Eventually, during that period, we used to carry food. And how we managed to carry the food, put in the thing there, they will find a way of communicating. Take toilet paper. I also write notes on the toilet paper and drop it in the food. You get to the place and my mother insisted that she was going to take the food in. I was not going to take, she was going to take it in. They would take all the clothes, waste it on the floor. Take the food, just go up in the food. She would bend down, pick it up, put it back in the thing there, send it in. When we went for the general teachers, he would send us notes on it to say whatever was happening to him and whatnot. And I remember one note he sent to me. And he told me, he said, Wilfred Clark. He said they were doing something with his, torturing him with his testicles. He said Wilfred Clark told him that if he didn't say that Ellen Johnson Sirleaf was part of it, even the American government would not be able to release him. And God knows that's the truth. Robert wrote that out to me. I don't know how many of you believe in the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down on green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still water. He restored my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they protect me. And you know, many of the faces I knew years ago, for some reason or the other, God has blocked them out of my mind. And I know I'm walking with my enemies. But I believe in that 23rd Psalm, and I know he is protecting me always. Anyway, eventually, Robert, you were carried to court. And again, you know, life is funny. One of the lawyers was Roger Steele. I remember my mother, my aunt Dinah Coleman, my sisters, myself, were all sitting on the front row. Roger Steele came down by this point. Yeah, excuse me. He turned himself up to us and told us to kiss his you-know-what. And we all just sat there. But you know, God is wonderful. Because when Roger Steele died, he couldn't even wipe his wound. Because they had amputated his legs, everything else, and he couldn't even clean himself. And that's the same thing he was telling us to kiss. And when he died, he couldn't even clean his wound. So you know, like I said, the 23rd Psalm, God is protecting me always. I know. Anyway, it was June. I don't remember, it was 6, 7, or 8 of June. Finally, we were carrying Robert's food one day. And we were told, by that time, when it came to February, Robert was taken out of Post Arcade and sent down to Central Prison. Of course, we got permission. We fixed up the prison. He, the president, and Jim Holder. We went there, we fixed it up, put in commodes, put in toilets, put in screens, fixed the roof, you know, and whatnot, and we made it a little bit comfortable for them. But that was a portion up to 1985, 86 when Robert was released. You know, another thing is, Robert, like I said, Robert was always being watched. When 1990 came, a lot of little small things happened in between. When 1990 came, I remember Robert had gone abroad to see his son. His son's birthday was December 4th, his son's 13th birthday. Robert left the 5th of December. He came back here and was killed on the 4th of January. The 4th of January, we buried him on the 8th, and my birthday was the 13th. Anyway, when Robert, that morning, it was about 7 something. And I heard all of this commotion. You know, my mother and I live next door to each other. And I heard all of this commotion, you know. I just got to take a bath. So I just threw on something, and I heard something about Boy Robber. You know, everybody's calling him Boy Robber. Boy Robber. And so I just threw on something, you know, and I took my car keys. I drove, I went to the other side. When I got to the other side, my mother, you know, she had come, Lola had told her, she was like, you know, like, Lola, she was trying to find the keys for her, you know, for the car. And I said to her, I said, Ma, I said, just drive with me. And we drove to Robert's house. The front door was locked. You know Robert's house? By the way, Robert's house is where everybody keeps saying that Judy Bryant building, Judy Bryant building. We took 4 buildings down to lease that place out to the company that has it. That building is my mother's. That property is my mother's. It has not changed hands. From the time it came from her grandfather, it has not changed hands, and it will not change hands. And in fact, the house that originally was there in the corner that they burned down in 1990 was the first house on that block before even Tolbert built further up. Anyway, that's where Casablanca is. So Robert, we went to the house, the yard was full. And when we got there, we went to the back. And when we got to the back door was open. And from, the back door led right into Robert's room. And then from there, you could see through to the living room, the door there. When we looked through, all we saw was this blood. The blood. And, he had a water bed, and next to it, he had a twin bed, this thing, a twin bed next to it. Because his wife apparently didn't like the water bed, so she used a, twin bed with a mattress. And my mother and I stood there as we watched, our eyes followed. And apparently, whoever was there that day got hurt so badly that they had taken off their clothes and they changed into Robert's clothes. But apparently they had taken the spread to sort of absorb the blood. So the blood was all on the floor, all on the beddings. And we're standing there at the door and we're following the blood stain. And when we turned like this, the mattress was here, and all of a sudden, Robert was on the floor. And my mother she said, Lord, my baby. And by the time she went to go reach for Robert, I reached for her. And we're sitting on the mattress, and I was rocking her. And up until this day, I can never tell you how we moved from that point for me to get outside crying up and down. Anyway, later on, we called, Marine Shaw came that day. We called my cousin, which was like a brother, Aaron Milton. He came, and Josiah Brown called Bishop Brown and told him, said, what happened? Told him, say, your priest is outside here distressed. He came, Robert, one of the Catholics, I think it was Father Joe. That came. And then my uncle Anson Coleman came. And then Henry Dennis came. And those were the people who were allowed in the room, And when they came, what I noticed, Robert's door had been stamped into. You could see the big boot and print, where what do you call it? The lines on the boot, the shoe print. You could see it on the door where it looked like when he realized what it was, before he could close the door, the person stamped into the door. And that day, I found a lot of, the bullets. But it's the thin bullets that look like pencil. It's not that round, thick one. It's the thin one that looks like pencil and has a point. We found a couple of them on the ground. This was about, like I said, maybe by 8:30 that morning. By the time we, got there, everything else and whatnot. And we called the authorities to inform them of Robert's death. They never came, because we couldn't move the body. They never came attacking around about 3 o'clock that afternoon. 3 o'clock, they never came. I remember, what a man name, man? Oh, can't think of his name. My uncle called his name here the other day. Slanger. I remember he came to the door dressed in a beige fire shade. They call it fire shades. And he came, I think the fellow he came with name was Johnson. When they got to the door, and I said, what are these people doing here? What are these people doing? What are you all doing here? I was so furious. I had to say he had come to show them what, what they had done the night before and whatnot. I was so furious. And I remember Bishop Brown saying to me, he said, Roberta, he said they can kill the body, but they can't kill the soul. They turned around and they left. Like I say, the people came. When they came, it was almost 3 o'clock before we could move that body. I left them there with my mother. But before I left, I got on my knees and I wanted to see my brother. Robert was in his t-shirt and his brief. Now, one drop of blood, listen, I'm telling you, was on Robert's t-shirt, on his undershirt or his brief. Now, one drop of blood. And he had a smile on his face. They cut my brother from here, straight through from here. I could see in this portion here, I could see the hole in it. Because he kept telling me, I said, no, because when I want to describe it, I must be able to say I saw it. What they did, I think they must have thought my brother was left-handed. Because maybe he kept trying to protect himself with his left hand. They did like this, and they cut his wrist like this, and Robert's hand was like this. Yes, they cut it. But not one drop of blood was on it. And it must have been so long because when we finally wrapped Robert in the bedspread to carry him to the undertakers. And his knee, it wouldn't bend because rigor mortis had already set in, it wouldn't bend. And I refused to let any photographer come inside and take pictures. And the pathologist came. At one point somebody came and said, oh, did they have film in the camera or whatnot? But can you imagine from that long when we got there for Robert body to be, stiff? Robert fought and somebody died. Somebody died because that amount of blood. Now one of it came from Robert. Only thing what they did also, they hit him in the head. That's what weakened him. They hit him in the head. He used to lift with the dumbbells. They hit him in the head, and I think that's what threw him off, and that's what weakened him, and then he fell. They had to hold him down, cut his throat, and cut his hand. Anyway, we wrapped the body. I left my mother there because she'd be doggone. She was not going to leave until the body was removed. The body was removed. People started coming, and then later on, that day was sitting down there, Georgia Cassell, Wally Dennis, Wally Bright Dennis. He used to always go to them to Sabina, And the story that the boy told us, I said, where were you? He said, Robert sent him to buy tonic water, But I remember my late husband, Wally Gray. He said to me that morning, he said, Roberta, he said, look, let's move those things out of Robert's house, the important things out of Robert's house, because if we don't, he said they'll come back and ransack it. So he got a pickup from somewhere, I don't remember, we got cars and whatnot, Tenement, Salif, Deline, she went with us, and we started packing. And I remember telling you the folks who worked with us, the carpenters, we had an interior decoration place. And he went to the ice box and he was packing soft drinks, And I said to him, I forgot his name, I said, no, we won't pack important things like paper. But I guess they were all confused because, they knew Robert very well. But he still packed it, and we took all of these things to my house. So when the boy explained that he sent to go buy, Robert sent to go buy tonic water. Then I said, wait a minute, I went to my house. There was tonic water. Robert didn't drink tonic water. Robert drank orange Fanta. He didn't drink orange Fanta, then he drank ginger ale. There was tonic water, orange Fanta, ginger ale, whole bunch of soft drinks in the icebox. All of them sitting down, they had brought it to my house, Anyway, we decided that happened. We had the funeral, and I tell you that happened that night. People came, people left, and whatnot. And as I went, I wrote my tribute. And I remember when I came home, I had trained my children 2 things. Always find your way in the dark. We didn't put our lights on in the house. You want to go to the bathroom, you should go in the dark. You want to go to drink water, you should go in the dark. I trained them that. Second thing I trained them to do is, after a certain time, never go to the door. If the doorbell rings, don't go to it. And luckily for me, they did it. That night, I don't know what happened to me, because normally robbers always joke me, my house was here, my bedroom was here, and they'd be talking, I call the telephone, I say, oh man, I think you're talking to so. Robert said, Ma, they got your house blocked, because I don't know how she could hear, But that night, I don't know what happened. After I gave my tribute that night, I went down, I lied down. I did not hear a sound. The soldiers came to my house that night. They were beating on the gates. I had bad dogs in my yard. They were beating on the gates. They were knocking on the gates. But apparently they were afraid to come in the yard because of the dogs. And my children, they knew not to go to the door. So they just stayed there. The next morning, the cook wife came to me. She said, sister, she came to the fence. I said, yeah, my mother, what happened? She said, you living? I said, but my mother, I'm not talking to you. I said, but why you ask me if I'm living? Then she said, but sister, you didn't hear the noise in your house last night? I said, what noise? And she proceeded to tell me. Then I called the children and said, Mommy, all last night, the noise, put bang on the gate. Then my Lebanese friends, who shared the building, on the other side, they said, Reverend, you all right? I said, yeah. They said, the noise was not easy. And apparently, as the people came to go outside, the soldier said, if you want, you go back inside your house. And that was happening that night. Because apparently, they had come to kill me or do something to me. But as God would have it, I never got up. I honestly did not hear the noise. We buried Robert, and after that, of course, you know the story about Van Riches, what happened to him, and all of that. And then we were still living in Sinkhole. And then my younger brother decided that, like I say, he was a pilot. He is a pilot. And he came, he took my sisters, their children, carried them. And he came, he said, Man Joy, I came to come pick up you and sis Roberta. I said, I'm not leaving. He said, but I don't want to leave you here. She said, I don't want you to be here. So you all go, I will stay. But my mother went down to a point where she had to pin her clothes on her. And I remember she told Winston Richards and Steve Horton, she said, my soul is gone. And she said, my only thing is my body is here because of Roberta. And I think if I didn't exist, I think maybe my mother would have committed suicide. Because she told him, she said, only her soul was gone, and only her body was there. Anyway, what happened Tilly moved in at Sam Watkins' house. I remember Solo Pepe. I can't remember his real name, but Solo Pepe was on the 15th Street corner of Coleman Avenue. And I remember one day we had gone around the block, and when he came back, we saw this checkpoint at 15th Street and Coleman Avenue. And he said to me, and I said, in other words, I don't know, He was asking me for what was happening, and I said, I didn't know. We found out that Tilly had moved into St. Joaquin House, which is on the corner of 15th Street and Coleman Avenue. My house is on the corner of 14th Street and Coleman Avenue, and my mother is next to me. And before he moved in there, Maype Green and her family were in there with Mother Kimba. And anyway, that's another story. But that's where they were taken from. Then later on, we found out that Solo Pepe, I think his mother-in-law must have been about 85, 90 or something like that. His mother-in-law, his wife, their whole family disappeared. Then later on, Maype Green, her husband, that whole family disappeared. And the funny thing about it is, when I found out, when Maype Green wasn't well, when I spoke to her, she said she wasn't feeling well, and I had gone back home. And then when they said Mother Kimba had left, I went looking for her, and it was good I didn't find her, because if I had found her, she would have been killed with my mother. And I remember also what is her name? Samuels, Louise Samuels. She had left her house, which is near where Viestadma, you know, that where Viestadma, where that place they had the school. No, J.J. Rouse, but there's an entity right there.
Well, the trade place.
That's a trade place, yeah, okay. She lives in that area, you know, and my mother was concerned about her, and she sent me, she said, look, go find your cousin Louise and tell her to come to me. Because, you know, we had food and things like, you know, we're giving people food and things like that, you know. So when I went to her, Wilma Dennis' wife, and Dr. Dennis, Cecilia Dennis, they had a house on Payne Avenue in that area there, somewhere in that area. When I went there, I told her, I said, Master, I'm going to come get you so you can go to her. She said, you know, I had a dream. And in the dream, my mother told me, when I move from where I am, don't go back to where, you know. And luckily again, she didn't, you know, she didn't come. The night that my mother was killed, okay, I will just go back in pieces. The night that my mother was killed, I remember it was after curfew time. And by that time, Tilly had moved into Sam Watkins' house. And, you know, the soldiers, the people came knocking on my mother's door. Open the door, open the door. And, you know, there was a fence. So I climbed over the fence and I went there and I said, what happened? He said, one no, any rebels in this house here? I said, no rebels. How many persons? I said, well, there, you know, few of us here. You know, and I started explaining whatnot. So Joe want to know, because I want to know if any of hosting any rebel. Mind you, these people who have been living in that area now for I don't know how long. Anyway, they left. They came back later that night. The dogs in my yard was barking. But, you know, my little daughter, Andrea, and was my mother's favorite. So when I went to Cottonton, when I left the children, when I came back, she decided that she was going to stay, you know, at my mother's house, sleep there, you know, whatnot. And I remember telling her, Andrea, if anything, get under your granny's bed, okay? If anything happened, go under the bed. And she said, okay, mommy. But before then, we started putting things together just in case. And my mother said to me, she said, I'm trying to figure where to put these things. And I took some of the papers, you know, important papers, I put it somewhere, you know, whatnot. And then she said, but Maka, let me show you where I put my jewelry. I said, Mama, I said, that's all right. As long as you remember, you know, whatnot. Anyway, they came that night. When my mother didn't want to open the door, they started to bust from the back. And they started to bust from the back, and eventually she opened the door. She opened the door, and they went throughout the house. They went throughout the whole house. And there was a back room where, you know, we kept food also. And she managed to leave the keys where I would see it. But you know, that was the first time in my life that I ever figured out that if gunshot hit you, it had to kill you or hurt you badly. In the night, Taylor used to be playing her music. And you know, pitch black dark when you saw fire in the air. I mean, and the thing was orange. When it go up with fire, you could see the orange light, you know. Anyway, they looted the house. What I did that night, I took my children, I packed up the money I had, their passports, everything else, and I carried them next to me. And I told the boy, you know, if anything, try and get them out. The next morning, around about 5:30, somewhere 5:30 that morning, I saw my mother when they were carrying them. There was a group of them to carry them out, and she flashed the flashlight back for them to see, because there was a low height for them to pass over. And they carried them. Around about 7 o'clock that morning, you could see from, because you know we had a business going there, interior decoration, you could see where pieces of fabric were all over the place. And I went over to Mark Richards' building where they were. And I started telling them, what you did to my mother, blah, 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 and you know, whatnot. And the man said, oh, really? He said, okay, I'm coming. When he said, I'm coming, I took my children, and you know, behind there, we call it, there's a little bastard town right behind them. I carried them and I left them there. Then I decided that I was going to go in my mother's yard and hide there. But that night, I remember there was an army man who had a pharmacy right in the same area. And apparently my children were telling him, please go help our grandma. And he said that white people will go. He said, but they're not white people, so I'm not going. And there was a boy named Jerry. I can't remember his last name. And he was staying there to help us in case. But the funny thing, I thought about it later on, that night Jerry didn't come, which was very unusual. But I never thought about it. And then later on, this army man, Jerry came, and then Jerry told my daughter's father, who was in the army, what had happened. And then he came with guns and whatnot, and he said, okay, sis, he said, pack the things that you need. And my daughter was saying, Mommy, pack the, and I was really in a daze. And I went over to my mother's house. When I went over to my mother's house, the only thing I took from there were pictures. The only thing I took from there were pictures. I just took them, put them in pillowcases and whatnot, and we drove. When we came down, we went to Center Street. And he said, we should go into the barracks with him. I said, no. I said, because I'm afraid. Everybody knows I'm Robert Phillips' sister. And he said, okay, where will you go? By that time now, Marine Shaw had sent notes, and whatnot to say, we down, so please come on down and whatnot. So I left my Peugeot, but I drove the Honda, and I went down. When I went down, God is something. Though I say the 23rd Psalm is a powerful psalm. There was a boy at the checkpoint. And he said, oh, Reverend, how you doing? Remember from Cottontown? I said, yeah, And after I left, he made some terrible remarks, So my daughter's father didn't say anything. We went. We got to Marine Shore place. Got to opposite that Johnson place where they had the checkpoint before you start to go into the embassy area. There's a big, I think it's a pinkish house now. That's where everybody was. So when I saw the crowd, I said, look, two things. I want to go back tomorrow to find out what happened to my mother. And the way I see the crowd, we have a lot of food in Cinco, so I will go back and go get it. When we were coming down, we met one boy. One at that time with Prince Johnson on that side and whatnot. He asked me to go, and I told him, saying, and I can't call the name, he called, he said, but when you come back here, you come to me to Central Bank building. I said, all right. We went. We passed where J Mart is. We came up. We drove. And then my daughter's father met me at the gate. We went to the house, and we picked up, a lot of food, rice, oil, blah, 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 and whatnot. And then they said that my mother was on 16th Street, the bodies were on 16th Street. That was never confirmed. Anyway, when we were going back, we got to J Mart, and this man came and stopped us. Where are you going? And, he said, come carry her to kill you. And the funny thing about it is my daughter, the oldest one, had said she wanted to go with me. I said, no. I said, I don't want to carry you. Anyway, I decided to carry her. We got down there, he got in the car, we started to, negotiate and explain. I said, well, I met this fellow so this morning, he can tell you that blah, 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 and whatnot, And eventually, the other fellow who was there, at the checkpoint there, he said, I know these people here. He said, I know these people here. Then he started to explain the story. But then the man said, okay, you go. He told my daughter, he said, you don't come back here. He said, because you never know what's going to happen tomorrow. When we got home, Martha Gibson was able to get my car parked in the Catholic church yard. I left it there for about a year. I never even used it. I left the keys, everything else, and I just left it there. When I came home, I said, I got to go look for this man that I met this morning. Everybody kept saying, you better leave that thing alone. I said, no. I said, I got to go. He said, okay, I don't know what's going to happen. Sure enough, he sent for me. When I went the first time, he wasn't there. I came back, and I told him to tell him, who I was and whatnot. Later on, he sent for me. Anyway, that part of the story is not that important. But then we left here, and eventually we left and we went to the States.